Well, hi there, it's Sandy Allnock, and I'm excited to bring my Create in Color segment to you for this month. And I'm going to be using the Hangin' with My Gnomies stamp set. I love these little gnomes, they are so cute. And I'm going to be watercoloring today. I did some quick masking. I stamped both of the gnomes first and cut out masks for them, and then stamped the house in behind it. So basically stamped on top, and then when you remove the masks, it looks like the gnomes are in front. I've got my Daniel Smith watercolors out and ready to roll. You could do this, of course, with a lot of different brands of watercolors, whatever you've got at home. And I'm choosing to put a lot of my color in the center. The section in the middle is going to be the focus. And my thought for this was to have the light focused on them and the house, like it's hitting directly on them, but they're in a deep forest. That was my mental idea for this one. And I did simplify the forest enough that I think if you're going to try to follow along with this video, I think you can handle it because it's not a really complex background. But you could also just follow along and do the painting like I'm doing it for the images, and that would make a cute card as well. It's stamped in a waterproof ink on watercolor paper, and I like to use Arches, either the rough or the cold press. This one is cold press today. And I'm just using the colors to fill in on my gnomes. I decided that the girl would be pink and the boy gnome with the big old beard would be a cobalt teal blue. So this pink is quinacridone rose. The flesh tone that I have in my palette, and I've chosen these colors myself for my own use, the flesh tone that I use is a yellow ochre, and it's a little on the yellowy side. So if I'm going to be painting something that has a lot more skin tone in it, I mix it with other things. But on something like this where the images are so tiny, it doesn't really matter. Just having that little bit of yellow ochre is enough to make it look like a flesh tone. For this little hat, and for both hats actually, I left a little highlight on them when I went around and did the first painting, and then rinsed my brush and just touched it to one side of it so that I'd get a soft shadow on one side and then the hard edge of the highlight on the other side, and that gives some dimension to it. I gave him boots that would match his beard because I was trying not to add too many colors into this. I wanted to keep the color scheme simple because that tends to draw the focus better rather than having a million colors. Just choose some colors to repeat throughout. So I had this new gamboge color for the roof of the house. It's also the color at the bottom of the door. So I used 3 colors in the door. And then I'm going to use one of the colors that I used for the beard and the hair as the shadow color in the yellow. So just kind of repeating the same colors across all of it in a relatively even way. If you can kind of squint at your artwork and see if there's something that's missing, something that's not looking like you see that color all over everything, and that will usually tell you kind of where to move things over to and change a color in something. I kept the house in all of those warm colors in behind, so I'm using the burnt sienna brown for the walls of the house, and then joined that to some neutrals down on the bottom because I wanted to have almost a spotlight coming down on the house, but I didn't know how dark this would end up being on the bottom. So I just put a goodly coat down here, added a little bit more extra while it was still wet at the bottom, and then held the board up so that vertical gravity would start pulling the color upward, and I'd end up with some smooth color. If you have trouble with getting your color to go across a page and make a nice even coat, try gravity. Gravity really helps a lot. And while it was still wet, this whole process for the background does take a little bit of speed. I had to keep the leading edges of everything wet, and then I also was paying attention down here to make a little bit of highlights by lifting color with a clean dry brush to pull some color out of it. But I had to keep all those top edges from freezing in place. I didn't want them to dry so much that I couldn't move them. So what you can do in order to do that, even if you're not ready to paint it all, is just keep adding water to it. Keep adding a little bit of light color and just swoosh some across that top edge so it stays wet. I had a little trouble with that here, but I also knew I was going to add some dark stuff in here for a shadow, so it wasn't going to matter so much that I didn't get it perfectly even. But I did, again, let gravity help me out a little bit by tipping my board so that that color was at least going to keep moving slightly. And that sort of thing. Gravity is totally my friend. I love to paint at an angle for that specific reason. And here you can see gravity just taking a ride across my card. And while it didn't come out perfect, it is a granulating color, so that tended to work with this. The green apatite is the color that I used primarily in that background. Now for this color, I mixed all the dark greens that I could, and I even added some neutral tint to it. So I've got some perylene green, some, let's see, what else was in there? Green apatite, a little bit of sap green, just a little bit of everything to try to make it a nice dark color and use thick enough paint to make it dark as well. And then I'm basically making the underside of the tree, doing negative painting so that it's the underside of the leaves at the top and then a tree trunk on the left and the right. And even for the opposite side of the tree trunk, in order to make it look like there's highlight facing them, I put a little stroke of the dark color on the opposite side and then just used a clean dry brush to kind of mush it out, so I end up getting that little highlight. I noticed that I did not make those tree trunks brown. I let all of that in the background be green so that it would just be soft in the background and disappear. I really wanted the characters and the house to be the important part. And I even went in and started adjusting the edges of all the tree stuff in there and just kind of loosening that up a little bit and making a little more detailed edges to it because it was looking a little too rigid, a little too graphical for me. Since I had all that really rich color in the green background, now I realized I could afford to go even darker for the foreground. So I mixed a really dark brown, again with a whole bunch of colors in it until I got it thick enough and dark enough to act like a shadow color in this whole foreground section. And look how that light now is focused on the two gnomes and the house. So once it was all dry, I got one of the dies out that has the lovely stitching on it. I was debating whether I wanted my sentiment at the bottom or the top. And the cool thing is you can just choose either. I left enough room on either side of the paper that I could heat emboss my From My Gnome to Yours sentiment and then pop the whole thing onto a card base. Now I love From My Gnome as a sentiment because a lot of these stamp sets say From Our Gnome to Yours, and I'm single. It's nice to have something from my gnome. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Go paint something beautiful yourself, and I'll see you again next month. Bye-bye.